The call came at 9:47 a.m. on the fourth morning of the first real vacation Ethan Carter had taken in 8 years, and it didn't just interrupt his coffee, it ended his career. Vanessa Hale's voice crackled through the phone with that particular blend of authority and contempt that comes from years of never hearing the word no. She wanted him back. Not next week, not tomorrow, now. And when Ethan, standing barefoot on a rented beach house deck, watching his 9-year-old son chase waves he'd promised to chase with him, said he couldn't, she fired him. Just like that. No warning, no consideration, no mercy. But what Vanessa didn't know was that the calm woman Ethan would meet 72 hours later over resort dinner, dark hair, sharp eyes, sitting alone with the weight of a billion-dollar empire on her shoulders, wasn't just being polite. She was taking notes. And she had the kind of power that makes companies very, very nervous. 30 hours before the call that would shatter everything, Ethan sat alone in the Meridian Technologies office at 3 in the morning. The building was silent except for the hum of servers and the frantic clicking of his keyboard. 4 monitors cast blue light across his exhausted face, each screen displaying a different catastrophe in progress. Patterson Healthcare's primary database was throwing errors he'd never seen before, and 200,000 patient records hung in digital limbo. His personal cell phone buzzed on the desk. Lucas' voice, thick with sleep, and something heavier disappointment worn smooth by repetition. The words came out small. "Dad, do I have to make my own breakfast again? You said you'd be home." Ethan's chest constricted. Every broken promise felt like another brick in a wall he was building between himself and the one person who mattered. "Heat up the waffles in the toaster, buddy. I'll be there as soon as I can." "You always say that." The line went dead before Ethan could respond. He stared at the phone, then at the error codes marching across his screens like accusations. Patterson Healthcare was Meridian's largest client. If he didn't fix this, people could die. But Lucas needed breakfast. Lucas needed a father who showed up. Ethan chose the screens. He always chose the screens. 8 years earlier, Jessica had been laughing that full-body laugh she only did around Lucas, the one that made their tiny apartment feel like it could hold the whole world. Their son, barely a year old, had been banging a wooden spoon against a pot with the concentrated fury of a tiny drummer. Then Jessica's face changed. Just for a second, confusion flickered across her features like a light dimming. She reached for the counter, missed, and collapsed. The doctor said it was a cerebral aneurysm. No warning, no symptoms, no survivors. 6 hours after that laugh, Ethan was sitting in a hospital corridor being told that the woman who made him believe in futures was gone, and he was now the sole architect of a 1-year-old's entire world. Meridian gave him 3 weeks bereavement leave. Flowers arrived at the funeral from people who'd never met Jessica. A card circulated through the office signatures from strangers offering condolences in identical corporate polite cursive. Then the call started. Gently at first, "Sorry for your loss, but there's a small issue escalating to urgent within days." Ethan returned because he needed the structure, needed the income, needed something to organize his days around, besides the overwhelming terror of keeping a human being alive on his own. Lucas became his entire universe, but Lucas also needed food and health insurance and a father who didn't completely disintegrate. So Ethan built new systems, morning routines, daycare networks, meal rotation schedules. The same methodical problem-solving he applied to server architecture, he applied to single parenthood. For 8 years it worked. Not perfectly, never perfectly, but it worked. Lucas was happy, healthy, curious. Every night when Ethan tucked him in, his son asked for one story about Mom, and Ethan would tell him about Jessica's laugh, her terrible singing voice, the way she'd collected seashells from every beach they'd ever visited. Lucas would fall asleep knowing he'd been loved by someone he couldn't remember, but who had wanted him more than anything. It should have been enough. It almost was. But somewhere in the relentless cycle of wake Lucas, schoolwork, pickup, homework, dinner, bedtime, collapse. Repeat. Ethan had stopped being a person and become a function. He performed tasks, met obligations, solved problems. The one thing he'd stopped doing entirely was resting, which was why 11 months ago he'd done something radical. He'd requested vacation time, not spontaneously, not impulsively. He'd planned it with the same careful attention he brought to system migrations. He checked the client calendar, avoided major deployment windows, scheduled it for late April when traffic was historically low. He documented every critical system in 127 pages of step-by-step instructions. He spent 2 months training the junior engineers, Mark, Sophia, Greg, on basic troubleshooting protocols that should have been second nature by now, but somehow never stuck when Ethan wasn't standing over their shoulders. He submitted the formal request through Meridian's HR portal 90 days in advance, as company policy required. Received automated confirmation. Followed up with his direct supervisor, then with the operations director, then because he knew how things actually worked with Vanessa Hale herself. Vanessa was Chief Operating Officer, a title she'd held for 3 years, and wielded like a blunt instrument. She was 52, razor-sharp, and pathologically opposed to anything suggesting employees had lives outside the office. She approved Ethan's vacation request with brevity that bordered on dismissive, "Fine, just make sure nothing breaks," as if Ethan controlled the universe. But the approval was documented, logged official. So when April finally arrived and Ethan loaded their aging Subaru with suitcases and beach toys and Lucas's favorite books, he'd felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. The morning before they left, Lucas sat at the breakfast table pushing cereal around his bowl. 9 years old, gap-toothed with Jessica's curls and Ethan's anxious eyes. He'd stopped asking when Dad would be home for dinner. He'd learned not to expect promises kept. Ethan crouched down until they were eye level. His son's face held an expression no child should master, the careful neutrality of someone bracing for disappointment. "I promise, buddy. This time it's just you and me. No work, no phone calls, just us." Lucas studied him with the solemn intensity of a kid who'd been let down before. "You promise like you promised you'd come to my soccer game." The words hit harder than any system failure ever had. "I promise better than that. I swear on Mom's memory, 9 days. You and me and the ocean." Something shifted in Lucas's expression, not quite trust, but the fragile beginning of it. "Okay, Dad." They drove 6 hours south to Crescent Bay, a small coastal town that advertised itself as rustic charm meets seaside elegance, which meant the cottage was clean, but the Wi-Fi was unreliable. Ethan had rented a 2-bedroom place with a deck overlooking the Pacific. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive. $1,200 they couldn't really afford, but space and quiet and the promise of 9 uninterrupted days. Day 1, Lucas ran straight to the deck and screamed with pure joy. The ocean stretched endless and silver blue, and for the first time in his short life there was nowhere his father had to be except right there. They spent the afternoon building an elaborate sandcastle with structural integrity that would have made any engineer proud. Lucas narrated a complex backstory involving knights and dragons and a hydraulic system that somehow made sense in 9-year-old logic. Ethan listened like it was the most important presentation he'd ever heard, because it was. Day 2, they explored tide pools. Lucas discovered hermit crabs and became obsessed photographing them from 17 different angles, taking notes in a small journal about shell size and mobility patterns. He looked up at Ethan with eyes bright with discovery. "Dad, did you know hermit crabs don't have their own shells? They have to find old ones from other creatures and live in them. Kind of like us living in this rental house." The observation carried more weight than Lucas probably intended. Ethan knelt in the shallow water beside his son. "You're right. But we still make it our home while we're here, don't we?" Lucas nodded seriously. "Home is where we are together." Ethan swallowed past the knot in his throat. When had his kid gotten so wise? Day 3, they found the perfect sand dollar. Lucas held it like treasure, and Ethan took a photo sunlight behind his son's small frame, joy written across a face that had learned too young how to be careful with happiness. That night, Lucas fell asleep clutching the sand dollar, and Ethan sat on the deck with real coffee, not the microwaved desperation he usually drank while answering emergency emails and listened to waves without thinking about uptime percentages or incident reports. For the first time in 8 years, he felt like a person instead of a function. The feeling lasted until 9:47 the next morning. Ethan woke naturally at 7, no alarm clawing him into consciousness. He made coffee, sat on the deck, watched pelicans dive for fish. His work phone sat silent in the bedroom, deliberately powered off. His personal cell had 3 missed calls from Mark, but no voicemails. Probably just panicking over something the documentation covered. At 9:47, his personal phone rang. Vanessa Hale's name lit the screen. Every instinct Ethan had developed over 8 years screamed danger. Vanessa calling his personal number meant something had gone catastrophically wrong, or she was about to make it catastrophically wrong. He answered. "Ethan?" No greeting from Vanessa, just that clipped, impatient tone that suggested she'd been waiting hours instead of half a ring. "We need you back." Ethan kept his voice level, professional. "I'm on vacation, Vanessa. Approved vacation." "I know that. But there's been a situation with Patterson Healthcare. The system's throwing errors the team can't handle." Through the window, Lucas was stirring awake, one arm stretching out from under the blankets. Ethan's chest tightened. "What specific error?" "I'm not a technician, Ethan. That's your job. But I can tell you that if we lose the Patterson account because you decided a beach vacation was more important than your responsibilities, you and I are going to have a serious problem." The Patterson account was Meridian's largest client, a healthcare network that processed patient records through Meridian's platform. Losing them would be catastrophic, and Vanessa knew invoking their name would trigger exactly the response she wanted. Except this time, something in Ethan resisted. "I left 127 pages of documentation, step-by-step recovery instructions for every critical system. If something's actually broken, they have what they need to fix it. Clearly they don't, or I wouldn't be calling you. I need you back in the office tomorrow morning. Book a flight. Send me the receipt. We'll reimburse you." The word came out quieter than Ethan intended, but it landed with the weight of something irreversible. "No." Silence on the other end. Then sharp with disbelief. "Excuse me. I said no. I requested this vacation 3 months in advance. You approved it. I planned for it. I documented everything. I'm here with my son, and I'm not cutting our trip short because the team doesn't want to follow the instructions I left." Lucas appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. "Dad, who are you talking to?" Ethan covered the phone. "Just work, buddy. Give me 2 minutes." Lucas nodded and shuffled toward the bathroom, and Ethan felt the full weight of what was happening settle over him like a physical thing. Vanessa's voice went cold, the tone she used when she'd stopped asking and started ordering. "Listen to me very carefully, Ethan. I don't care what you documented. I don't care what you planned. What I care about is that we have clients threatening to walk, and you're the only one who can fix it. So you have a choice. You can be a professional and get on a plane, or you can be selfish and stay on your little vacation. But if you choose the latter, there will be consequences." "Are you threatening to fire me for taking approved vacation time?" "I'm telling you that we have a business to run, and if you're not willing to do what's necessary to run it, then maybe we need someone who is." Ethan's voice steadied, anchored by something deeper than fear. "I've done what's necessary for 8 years, Vanessa. Every weekend, every holiday, every 3 a.m. emergency. I've held this place together while other people got promoted, got credit, got to go home at 5. And the first time in almost a decade, I take a week off that was approved months ago. You're telling me that's not acceptable. What I'm telling you is that if you're not willing to be a team player, then maybe Meridian isn't the right fit for you anymore." Lucas came back from the bathroom, looked at Ethan's face, and went very still. Kids always know. Ethan made his voice clear, final. "Let me be very clear. I'm not coming back early. The team has everything they need to handle normal operations. If there's an actual emergency, something truly breaking that can't be resolved with the documentation I provided, they can call me, and I'll walk them through it remotely. But I'm not getting on a plane. I'm not abandoning my son. And I'm not rewarding a system that treats approved time off as optional. Then you're fired. The words were delivered with such casual finality that for a moment Ethan thought he'd misheard. What? You heard me. Effective immediately. Send your laptop and access badge back via courier. HR will be in touch regarding final paycheck and insurance documentation. This conversation is over. The line went dead. Ethan stood there on the deck phone, still pressed to his ear, listening to silence. 8 years of 60-hour weeks and sacrificed weekends and sleeping with his phone on the nightstand. 8 years of building their entire operational infrastructure from scratch and saving them from disasters and training every new hire who walked through the door. Fired for taking vacation. His phone buzzed. Text message from an HR number he didn't recognize. Mr. Carter, this is Janice from Human Resources. We've been informed of your termination. Please arrange for return of all company property within 48 hours. Your employment agreement includes a non-compete clause and confidentiality provisions. Violation of these terms will result in legal action. Another buzz. Different number. Legal Department. Mr. Carter, pursuant to your separation from Meridian Technologies, we remind you that your non-compete agreement remains in effect for 18 months. You are prohibited from working for any direct competitor or soliciting Meridian clients. We have already notified relevant parties in the industry of your departure. Any breach will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Ethan's hands were shaking. They weren't just firing him. They were making sure he couldn't work anywhere else. The non-compete was aggressively broad, covering basically every company in their industry vertical. 18 months without income. Lucas to support. Health insurance tied to employment. Another buzz. Vanessa's personal number. You made your choice. Don't expect a reference. Lucas stood in the doorway, small and uncertain. His voice came out barely above a whisper. Dad, did you just lose your job because of me? Everything in Ethan wanted to lie to soften it to make it okay. But Lucas deserved better than comfortable lies. Ethan knelt down until they were eye level. Buddy, I didn't lose my job because of you. I lost it because I chose you, and I would make that choice 1,000 times. Lucas's eyes filled with tears. But what are we going to do? Ethan pulled his son into a hug, felt the small body shaking, and made a decision that went against every survival instinct he'd developed since Jessica died. Right now, we're going to finish our vacation. Then we'll figure it out. Together. But, no buts. We have 5 more days here. 5 days of just you and me and the ocean. Whatever happens after that, we'll handle it. But I'm not letting them take this from us too. Lucas pulled back, searching his father's face for the truth beneath the brave words. You promise? I promise. They made pancakes together in the cottage's tiny kitchen. Lucas did the mixing with intense concentration. Ethan handled the griddle, and they argued good-naturedly about whether chocolate chips constituted an acceptable breakfast food. The knot in Ethan's chest didn't loosen, but it became something he could breathe around. His phone kept buzzing. He ignored it. They ate on the deck, watching surfers catch early waves. Lucas told him a complicated story about a comic book he was reading, something involving time travel and alternate dimensions, and a hero who didn't know he had powers. Ethan listened, really listened, and asked questions that made Lucas's face light up with the joy of being taken seriously. After breakfast, they loaded a backpack with water bottles and sunscreen and walked down to the tide pools. The morning was cool fog just starting to burn off, and the pools were alive with tiny ecosystems. Lucas found another sand dollar, this one perfect, unbroken, and wanted to document everything in his journal. They spent 3 hours there. Lucas photographed hermit crabs from every angle, sketched the way anemones retracted when touched, collected bits of sea glass worn smooth by decades of waves. Ethan took pictures on his phone, the one thing he allowed himself to use it for, and tried not to think about what was happening back at the office. But he couldn't help it entirely. His mind kept cycling through scenarios. The junior engineers would be panicking by now, escalating to Vanessa, who would be escalating to clients. Someone would try to access systems and discover Ethan's administrative credentials had already been revoked. Recovery procedures would fail because no one had actually read the documentation. Clients would get angry. Vanessa would get defensive. The whole thing would spiral. Part of him, the part that had spent 8 years being responsible for everything, wanted to fix it. Wanted to call them back, swallow his pride offer to walk them through it remotely just to keep the damage from spreading. But another part of him, the part that had just watched Lucas's face light up over a sand dollar, knew that fixing it would mean teaching them that boundaries didn't matter, that approved vacation could be revoked with a phone call, that Ethan's time, his presence, his life with his son, none of it was actually his. So he made a choice. He let them fail, not out of spite, not out of revenge, but out of simple recognition that he'd been holding together something that should have been able to stand on its own, and the only way to prove it couldn't was to stop holding it. They returned to the cottage around 2. Lucas was sunburned, despite sunscreen, exhausted, despite enthusiasm, and already planning tomorrow's adventures. Ethan made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, and they ate while Lucas drew pictures of the creatures they'd found. After lunch, Lucas settled on the couch with his book, and Ethan finally reluctantly checked his phone. 47 messages, 12 missed calls, 3 voicemails. He started with the voicemails. The first was from Greg Chen, one of the junior engineers, voice tight with panic. "Ethan, hey, Vanessa said you're not coming back and we're kind of in trouble here. Patterson's system is throwing errors we haven't seen before, and the runbook you left doesn't cover this specific case. Can you call me, please?" The second was from Vanessa, all pretense of professionalism gone. "Ethan, I don't know what game you think you're playing, but this is bigger than your ego. We have clients threatening legal action. If you have any shred of professionalism left, you'll call me back." The third was from someone named David Reeves, who identified himself as Meridian's general counsel. "Mr. Carter, this is formal notification that your refusal to cooperate during a critical business incident may constitute breach of your employment agreement. We strongly advise you to contact this office immediately to discuss your obligations." Ethan deleted all 3. The text messages were variations on the same themes: panic from engineers, anger from Vanessa, legal threats from HR and counsel. And starting around noon, something new: messages from clients. The first was from Tom Prescott, CEO of Patterson Healthcare. "Ethan, Tom Prescott here. Vanessa tells me you've left the company. Is that true? I need to speak with you directly. Call me." Then Jennifer Valdez, CTO of Horizon Financial. "Ethan, we're experiencing service degradation and your team isn't responding effectively. What's happening over there?" The clients were reaching out to him directly, not to Meridian's support line, not to the operations team, to him, because somewhere in 8 years of solving their problems, he'd become the company to them, not the brand, not the executives, him. And Vanessa had fired him without considering what that meant. His phone rang. Unknown number. Against better judgment, he answered. "Ethan Cole." "Ethan, it's Tom Prescott. Thanks for picking up." The voice was warm, concerned, carrying the unmistakable authority of someone used to getting straight answers. "I need you to tell me what's going on. I just got off a call with your COO and her story doesn't make sense." Ethan walked out onto the deck, lowering his voice so Lucas wouldn't hear. "What did she tell you?" "That you quit without notice during a critical period and left the company in a lurch." "But I've known you for 5 years, Ethan. That doesn't sound like you. So I'm asking directly, what happened?" Something in Ethan's chest loosened slightly. "I didn't quit. I was fired for refusing to cut short an approved vacation." Silence on the other end, then carefully controlled, "Say that again." "I requested vacation 3 months in advance. It was approved. I documented everything, trained the team, scheduled it during a low-traffic period. On the 4th day of my trip, Vanessa called and demanded I fly back immediately. When I said no, she fired me. That was this morning." Tom made a sound that might have been a laugh or a curse. And the service issues we're experiencing, probably legitimate, but nothing that can't be handled with the documentation I left. The team is panicking because they're not used to solving problems without me. And Vanessa is making it worse by treating every ticket like an emergency. Another pause. When Tom spoke again, his voice carried an edge. Can you send me proof, the vacation approval, the termination, whatever you have? Why? Because I'm about to make some calls and I want to make sure I have the story straight. The kind of calls where I ask Vanessa why we're paying premium rates to a company that fires its best engineer for taking approved time off. The kind where I seriously reconsider whether we want to renew our contract. Tom, you don't have to. Yes, I do. You've kept our systems running for 5 years, Ethan. You've answered calls at midnight. You've fixed problems before they became disasters. You've treated our data like it mattered because you knew it did. A company that treats someone like that as disposable doesn't deserve our business. Ethan didn't know what to say. For 8 years he'd been invisible, a function, a problem solver who worked in the background while other people took credit. But Tom Prescott saw him, and if Tom saw him, others might too. He forwarded the email chain showing his vacation approval, Vanessa's termination text, and the HR threats. Then he put his phone away and went back inside. Lucas looked up from his book. Everything okay, Dad? Ethan sat down next to him on the couch, and for the first time since that morning he actually meant it when he said, Yeah, buddy, everything's okay. That night, after Lucas fell asleep clutching his new sand dollar, Ethan sat on the deck with a beer and thought about the past 8 years. About sleeping with his phone on the nightstand, about missing soccer games and parent-teacher conferences, about becoming so essential to Meridian's operations that he'd forgotten he was supposed to have a life outside them. His phone buzzed. Jennifer Valdez calling. Jennifer? Ethan, I hope I'm not interrupting your vacation. You're fine. What's going on? Her voice carried both frustration and determination. I'm calling with a proposal. We just ran a comprehensive audit of everything Meridian's been doing for us over the past 2 years. Want to know what we found? I'm not sure I do. 68% of our support tickets were resolved by you personally. 68%. Every system optimization, every emergency fix, every performance improvement, all you. The rest of their team were basically ticket routers. They'd receive a problem, escalate it to you, then take credit when you solved it. Ethan closed his eyes. He'd known he was handling most of the work, but seeing it quantified made it worse somehow. Jennifer continued, voice hardening. We paid Meridian premium rates for enterprise support. What we actually got was one extremely overworked engineer and a bunch of people pretending to be a team. That's fraud, Ethan, or close enough that our legal department is very interested. What did Vanessa say when you told her? That you were a disgruntled employee making false claims. Then I sent her the audit results and asked her to explain how 68% of our tickets being handled by one person constituted a team effort. She stopped returning my calls after that. Ethan leaned against the railing, processing. Have other clients done the same analysis? Jennifer Valdez called me this afternoon. Turns out she ran the numbers too. Hers were even worse, 71%. She's already filed notice of contract termination. And I've been getting calls from 3 other Meridian clients asking what's going on because apparently Vanessa's been telling everyone you quit without notice, but the timeline doesn't match what they're seeing. What are you telling them? The truth. That you were fired for taking approved vacation. That Meridian's infrastructure was entirely dependent on one person. And that the company's current crisis is the result of years of mismanagement they successfully hid by exploiting you. Part of Ethan felt vindicated. Another part felt guilty. All those client relationships he'd built, all those systems he'd maintained, they were collapsing. And he was the proximate cause, even if he wasn't the root cause. Tom, people are going to lose their jobs over this. Engineers who didn't do anything wrong except work for a dysfunctional company. I know. And that's terrible, and it's not fair to them. But you know what else isn't fair? Spending 8 years propping up a system designed to exploit you, then getting fired the moment you tried to establish a boundary. You didn't cause this, Ethan. You just stopped preventing the inevitable. The words settled into Ethan's chest with uncomfortable weight. Tom was right, but that didn't make it easier. There's something else you should know. Greg Chen, one of your junior engineers, reached out to a few clients directly because he was worried about the legal threats Meridian was making against you. He wanted people to know you'd left comprehensive documentation and that the problems weren't technical failures. They were training and culture failures. Greg did that. Yeah, kid's got integrity. He's probably going to get fired for it, but he did it anyway. And the picture he painted matches everything we've been seeing. After Tom hung up, Ethan pulled up Greg's number and sent a text. Hey Greg, heard you've been talking to clients. Thank you for telling them the truth. How much trouble are you in? The response came almost immediately. Ethan, man, I'm so glad you texted. I'm probably getting fired tomorrow, but I don't care. What they did to you was wrong, and someone needed to say it. Are you okay? I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. If you do get fired, call me. I might know someone who's hiring. Seriously. Seriously. You're a good engineer, Greg. And more importantly, you're honest. That matters more than people think. Ethan set the phone down and stared out at the ocean. The night was clear, stars visible in a way they never were back in the city. He could hear Lucas's soft breathing through the open window, that particular rhythm of deep sleep that meant his son was completely at peace. For 8 years, Ethan had measured his worth by his usefulness, by how many tickets he could close, how many fires he could extinguish, how many systems he could keep running through sheer force of will. He'd told himself it was noble, providing for his son, being reliable, being the person people could count on. But somewhere in that, he'd stopped being a person and become a utility. And utilities don't get vacations. They don't get boundaries. They just work until they break, or until someone finds a cheaper alternative. His phone buzzed again. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Ethan Carter. Mr. Carter, this is Rebecca Torres from TechWatch Daily. I'm writing a story about Meridian Technologies and their recent client exodus. Multiple sources have indicated you were central to their operations. Would you be willing to speak on record about your experience? Ethan stared at the phone. TechWatch Daily was a major tech industry publication. If they were covering Meridian's implosion, it meant the story had grown beyond a simple contract dispute. What sources? Tom Prescott, Jennifer Valdez, and someone named Greg Chen, who forwarded me documentation showing you handled 68% of Meridian's workload personally. Greg had leaked it. Good for him. This is bigger than one company, Mr. Carter. This is about industry-wide culture of burning out engineers and calling it dedication. Will you help me tell that story? Ethan could stay silent, take the settlement whenever they offered it, move on quietly. Or he could speak up, risk industry backlash, but maybe change something. He thought about Lucas, about 8 years of missed bedtimes, about Sophia getting laid off, about every engineer grinding themselves to dust because they didn't know they were allowed to say no. Yes, I'll talk. Day 5 began with Lucas enthusiastically making breakfast scrambled eggs that were slightly rubbery and toast that was slightly burned, but made with such genuine pride that Ethan ate every bite and declared it the best meal he'd had all week. They spent the morning building one final elaborate sandcastle that incorporated engineering principles Lucas had learned from a science video about structural integrity. Ethan followed his son's instructions, digging moats and reinforcing walls, asking questions that made Lucas explain his reasoning with the seriousness of a professional presenting to clients. The final product was lopsided and doomed to be destroyed by the tide, but Lucas documented it with photographs from multiple angles and declared it their finest architectural achievement. "Do you think it'll still be here tomorrow?" Lucas asked. "Probably not. Probably. The tide will take it tonight." Lucas considered this with 9-year-old gravity. That's kind of sad. Or kind of beautiful. We made something that mattered to us. We enjoyed it while it was here. Then we let it go. Not everything has to last forever to be worthwhile. Lucas looked at him with those two old eyes. "Is that what happened with your job?" Ethan felt his heart skip. "What do you mean?" You haven't been checking your phone as much. And yesterday when someone called you looked really stressed before you answered. Did something happen with work? There was no point in lying. Lucas was too perceptive, and Ethan had learned over the years that his son could handle truth better than most adults. Yeah, something happened. I got let go from my job. Lucas's eyes went wide. You got fired? Yeah. Why? Because I chose to stay here with you instead of going back when they wanted me to. Lucas processed this, his young face cycling through several emotions: confusion, worry, something that might have been guilt. Because of me. Ethan knelt down, gripped his son's shoulders. Not because of you, because of them. They wanted me to abandon our vacation, our time together, because they had a problem. And when I said no, they decided they didn't want me working there anymore. But you worked there for a really long time. 8 years. And they just fired you for taking a vacation. They said you could take... Yes. Lucas sat down in the sand next to the castle, small shoulders tense. That's not fair. No, it's not. Are we in trouble? Like money trouble. Ethan sat down next to him. We're going to be okay. I have some savings and I'm already getting messages from other companies who want to hire me. It might be tight for a little while, but we'll figure it out. We always do. I'm sorry, Dad. For what? For making you choose me over your job. Ethan turned Lucas to face him, hands on shoulders, meeting his eyes directly. Listen to me. You didn't make me choose anything. I chose you because you're the most important thing in my life. And because I was tired of letting work come first. That job was making me into someone I didn't want to be, someone who was always stressed, always tired, always putting you second. Getting fired might actually be the best thing that could have happened, because now I get to find something better. Something that lets me be the father you deserve. Lucas's eyes were wet. Really? Really. I promise. They sat there for a while, father and son, on a beach, watching waves destroy and rebuild the shoreline. And Ethan felt something shift in his chest, not the heavy weight of responsibility he'd been carrying, but something lighter. The recognition that sometimes losing what you thought you needed made room for what you actually wanted. The restaurant was called the Seaside Terrace, and it occupied prime real estate at the north end of Crescent Bay's boardwalk. White tablecloths, soft lighting from hurricane lamps, floor-to-ceiling windows that turned the Pacific into living artwork. The kind of place Ethan normally wouldn't choose, too expensive, too formal for a 9-year-old, but Lucas had spotted it during one of their walks and asked if they could eat somewhere fancy before going home. Ethan said yes before he'd even calculated the cost. What was money when measured against the light in his son's eyes? Day 7. 3 days since the phone call that ended his career. 3 days of deliberately ignoring the digital avalanche while he and Lucas explored every tide pool, every stretch of sand, every ice cream shop within walking distance. 3 days of being present in a way he hadn't managed since Jessica died. The hostess led them to a table with ocean views. Lucas wore his navy shirt with the tiny anchors, the collar bothering him enough that he kept tugging at it every 30 seconds. Do I have to keep this buttoned the whole time? Just through dinner. Then you can go back to your shark shirt. The shark shirt doesn't strangle me. The anchor shirt isn't strangling you. It's just reminding you that you have a neck. Lucas grinned despite himself, and Ethan felt warmth spread through his chest. These moments, his son's smile unguarded and genuine, were worth more than any salary Vanessa could have offered. The hostess returned expression apologetic. I'm so sorry, gentlemen, but we're completely booked tonight and we have a situation. We have a single diner who requested a quiet table and we're at capacity. Would you mind terribly if we seated her with you? We'd comp your appetizers for the inconvenience. Ethan glanced at Lucas, who shrugged with 9-year-old indifference. I don't mind. That's fine. Relief washed across the hostess's face. Thank you so much. I'll send her right over. The woman who approached their table made Ethan's breath catch in a way he hadn't experienced since Jessica. Not because she was beautiful, though she was in that understated way that spoke of bone structure rather than makeup, but because of how she moved. Purposeful, controlled, like someone who'd learned young that the world noticed everything and forgave nothing. 5'8", maybe. dark hair pulled back in a low ponytail that managed to look both casual and expensive, brown eyes that swept the room with the assessment of someone constantly calculating vectors and vulnerabilities, white linen pants, navy shirt cut with the kind of simplicity that cost serious money, no jewelry except a watch that Ethan recognized as a Patek Philippe worth more than his Subaru. She looked exhausted, not sleepy exhausted, soul exhausted, the kind that came from carrying too much for too long. "Thank you for letting me crash your dinner." Her voice had a rasp to it, like she'd spent too many hours on conference calls and not enough remembering to drink water. "I'm Rachel Ashford. I promise I'm not usually the kind of person who invades family meals." Ethan stood. Lucas followed his lead. "Ethan Carter, this is my son Lucas." Lucas gave a small wave. "Hi." Rachel sat, and something shifted in her expression when she looked at Lucas, the corporate armor softening into something more human. "Hi, Lucas. That's a sharp shirt. Naval theme, right?" Lucas looked genuinely surprised that an adult had noticed. "Yeah. My dad made me wear it. It's uncomfortable." Rachel laughed, and the sound transformed her face entirely. "I get it. I hate high collars too. But sometimes we have to dress up to make the grown-ups happy." "Do you have to do that?" "All the time." The server appeared with menus, and for a few minutes they occupied themselves with the serious business of food selection. Lucas debated between fish and chips and pasta with an intensity suggesting global implications. Rachel ordered grilled salmon and a simple salad. Ethan chose the steak the first time in years he'd ordered something that cost more than $15. Rachel broke the comfortable silence. "So are you two locals or visiting?" "Visiting. We're here for a couple more days. First time in Crescent Bay for Lucas." "And you?" The question came from Lucas before Ethan could respond, and Rachel smiled at his directness. "I have a house about 20 minutes north, a place I escape to when the world gets too loud." Lucas's eyes lit with curiosity. "What kind of work lets you escape like that?" Ethan started to intervene. "Don't interrogate strangers about their jobs," but Rachel seemed genuinely amused rather than offended. "The kind where you've been doing it long enough that other people can handle things when you're not there. Though that took me a very long time to learn." Something clicked in Ethan's chest. He recognized the weight in those words, the years of being indispensable, the slow discovery that indispensable was just another word for trapped. "That's a rare skill." Rachel's attention shifted to him fully, really looking for the first time. Her eyes were sharp, analytical, but not cold. "It is. I spent too many years thinking I was the only one who could solve certain problems. All it did was make me tired and make everyone around me dependent." She paused, cutting into her salmon with surgical precision. "Eventually I figured out that the best thing I could do was build systems that worked without me. Turns out that's also the hardest thing to do." Lucas cocked his head. "Why is it hard?" "Because it requires trusting other people and admitting you're not actually irreplaceable, which hurts the ego a bit." Ethan felt seen in a way he hadn't experienced in 8 years. This stranger was describing his entire professional existence, and she had no idea. The conversation flowed naturally from there. Rachel asked about their week, and Lucas told her about sand dollars and hermit crabs and the elaborate castle they'd built that morning. She listened like his observations about tidal ecosystems actually mattered, asking follow-up questions that made Lucas sit taller in his chair. Ethan found himself watching her, the way she gave Lucas her full attention, the way she seemed genuinely interested rather than adult polite. When their food arrived, she ate with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to maximize every minute, but she never made Lucas feel rushed when he was explaining something. Over dessert, chocolate cake for Lucas, key lime pie for Rachel, coffee for Ethan. The conversation took a turn. Rachel leaned back slightly, studying Ethan with that assessing gaze. "Can I ask what you do for work?" The question landed heavier than she probably intended. Ethan felt Lucas tense beside him, both of them suddenly aware of the landmine. "I was an operations engineer. Enterprise systems. Kept things running." The word was gentle, not prying. just noticing. Long story. We have time until they kick us out. Ethan glanced at Lucas, who was focused on his cake but clearly listening. There was something about Rachel, the openness, the lack of judgment, the sense that she'd lived enough to understand complicated truths that made honesty feel less dangerous than it should have. I worked for a software company called Meridian Technologies for 8 years. Built most of their infrastructure, maintained, all of it handled escalations. Basically became a single point of failure, though I tried not to be. He paused, choosing words carefully. This vacation was the first real time off I'd taken since my wife died 8 years ago. I planned it months in advance, documented everything, got approval from everyone, up to the COO. 4 days in, she called and demanded I come back immediately. When I refused, she fired me. Just like that. Rachel's expression didn't change, but something in her stillness suggested she was processing more than just the words. For taking approved vacation. For choosing my son over a crisis the team should have been able to handle themselves. Could they have handled it? The question was sharper than her tone suggested. Ethan recognized it as the kind of thing someone asked when they already suspected the answer. I think so, but they'd spent years having me solve every problem, so they never developed the confidence or the muscle memory to try. Rachel nodded slowly, and Ethan saw something shift in her eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or solidarity. And the COO's response to that structural failure was to eliminate the person who'd been compensating for it. Apparently. Lucas was watching them now, cake forgotten, trying to follow a conversation that was clearly about more than just job details. Rachel set her fork down with deliberate care. Can I ask you something technical? Sure. If you were designing Meridian's infrastructure from scratch today, knowing what you know now, what would you do differently? The question pulled Ethan out of the emotional weight and into the clean space of systems thinking. He considered it seriously, the way he would have approached any design problem. I'd separate the monitoring from the response systems. Right now, they're too tightly coupled. If one fails, you lose visibility into whether the other is working. I'd build in more automated recovery for common failure modes instead of relying on human intervention. And I'd design the whole thing with the assumption that any single engineer, including me, could disappear tomorrow and the systems would keep running. How much of that did you actually implement? Maybe 60%. I tried, but there was always something more urgent. And honestly, I think part of me liked being necessary. Made me feel less replaceable. Rachel's smile was small but genuine. That's the trap, isn't it? We build ourselves into systems because it feels like job security. And then we wake up one day and realize we've built a prison. The metaphor landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Ethan found himself leaning forward, drawn into a conversation that felt more like confession than small talk. What if you build the systems, document everything, train people, and they still can't function without you? Rachel looked up and something sharpened in her gaze. Interest beyond polite dinner conversation. Then one of three things is true. Either the systems aren't as good as you think they are, or the people aren't as incapable as they seem, or the culture doesn't actually want them to succeed without you. She held his eyes. Organizations develop dependencies the same way people do. Sometimes it's easier to keep one person running themselves into the ground than to actually distribute responsibility and accountability, especially if that person is good enough to make the dysfunction invisible. Silence settled over the table. Lucas was staring at both of them like he'd stumbled into a conversation in a language he almost understood but couldn't quite speak. Ethan's throat felt tight. You sound like you've seen that pattern before. I've lived it, both as the person running myself into the ground and as the leader who let someone else do it because it was convenient. Matter of fact, no pride, no shame, just the acknowledgement of someone who'd learned expensive lessons and chosen to remember them. That's actually how I learned that the best engineers aren't the ones who can fix anything. They're the ones who build things that don't break in the first place. And the best leaders aren't the ones who can solve every crisis. They're the ones who create environments where crises are rare. Lucas interrupted, apparently deciding this was important enough to warrant breaking adult conversation rules. "What kind of work do you do?" Rachel's expression softened again when she looked at him. "Infrastructure. Large-scale distributed systems. Cloud architecture, redundancy, design, that kind of thing." "What company?" The pause was so brief, Ethan almost missed it a moment where Rachel seemed to weigh how much to reveal. "Cascade Dynamics. I'm the founder, though these days I mostly stay out of the way and let smarter people run things." Ethan's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. Cascade Dynamics wasn't just a company, it was the company, a global powerhouse in cloud infrastructure that served half the Fortune 500. Their platform handled exabyte-scale data flows. Their uptime was legendary, and their engineering culture was the kind of thing people in Ethan's field discussed with equal parts envy and reverence. Rachel Ashford wasn't just successful in tech, she'd built one of the foundational platforms the modern internet ran on. And Ethan had just spent 20 minutes complaining about documentation to her. He must have looked stunned because Rachel raised a hand slightly. "Please don't. I know what you're thinking. But I don't announce it because it ruins conversations. People start acting differently." Lucas, blessedly immune to corporate hierarchy, asked the question Ethan was too busy processing to voice. "Are you famous?" Rachel laughed. "In very specific circles where people care about network latency and data replication, so no, not in any way that matters to normal humans." Lucas nodded, accepting this with 9-year-old logic. "My dad cares about that stuff. He's always talking about servers." Rachel's attention shifted back to Ethan, and he saw curiosity there, genuine interest, rather than polite networking. "Yeah. What do you do exactly?" Past tense still felt wrong, but present tense wasn't accurate anymore. "I was an operations engineer, enterprise systems mostly, made sure things stayed running." "Which company?" "Meridian Technologies." Rachel's expression didn't change, but Ethan caught something recognition, maybe calculation. "I know them. Mid-tier enterprise solutions, good product, questionable management." Then carefully, "You said you were fired for taking approved vacation. During what specifically?" "Fourth day of a 9-day trip. Vanessa, the COO, called and said Patterson Healthcare was having issues. Demanded I come back immediately. When I said no, she terminated me on the spot." Rachel set down her water glass with the kind of control that suggested she was actively managing her response. "Patterson Healthcare is your largest client." "Was our largest client, yes." "And she fired the engineer who knew their system best, during an active incident, for refusing to abandon approved time off." It wasn't a question. Rachel was working through the logic, and Ethan could see her arriving at conclusions that matched his own. "That's not just bad management, that's strategically incompetent." Despite everything, Ethan almost smiled. "That's one way to put it." Rachel leaned forward slightly, and Ethan felt the full weight of her attention, the same intensity she probably brought to board meetings and investor calls now focused entirely on him. "Ethan, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to just listen. Don't respond. Don't argue. Just hear me out." He nodded. "Cascade has been looking for someone to lead our infrastructure resilience division for about 6 months. It's a new team focused on helping enterprise clients build systems that don't collapse when key people leave. We need someone who understands both the technical architecture and the human systems that break it. Someone who's lived the consequences of single points of failure and knows how to design around them." She paused, letting that settle. "From what you've described, you spent 8 years doing exactly that work, just without the title or the compensation or the organizational support that should have come with it. You built enterprise-grade systems. You managed client relationships. You carried institutional knowledge that should have been distributed across a team." Lucas was watching them with wide eyes, sensing something significant, even if he didn't grasp the details. "I'm not offering you a job. Not tonight. Not like this. That wouldn't be appropriate, and frankly, we have a whole process that would make HR very angry if I skipped it. But I'm telling you that when you're ready after this vacation, after you've had time to think about what you actually want, There's a conversation worth having." Rachel pulled a business card from her wallet and slid it across the table. Cream cardstock, minimal design. Just her name and email address and a phone number. "That's my direct line. No assistants, no gatekeepers. If you call, I'll answer, or I'll call you back. No pressure, no timeline. Just an open door when and if you want to walk through it." Ethan picked up the card, feeling the weight of expensive paper stock, and slid it carefully into his wallet. "Why would you even consider someone you just met?" Rachel's smile was slight but genuine. "Because I've been doing this for 16 years, and I've learned to recognize the difference between someone who's good at their job and someone who's been invisibly holding something together through sheer force of will. The first kind is valuable. The second kind is rare. And the second kind usually doesn't realize how rare they are until someone tells them." The server appeared with the check, and Rachel reached for it before Ethan could react. "Please, consider it a welcome to Crescent Bay, or a thank you for letting me crash your dinner, or just an old entrepreneur's prerogative to buy a meal for good company." They said their goodbyes outside the restaurant. Rachel shook Lucas's hand with the seriousness that made Lucas stand straighter, then shook Ethan's. "I meant what I said. When you're ready." She walked toward the parking lot with that same purposeful stride, and Ethan stood there holding his son's hand, trying to process what had just happened. Lucas tugged on his sleeve. "Dad, was that a job offer?" "Sort of. Maybe. I don't know." "Would we have to move?" "I don't know that either, buddy." Lucas thought about this for a moment. "Would you be gone all the time again?" The question hit harder than any technical challenge ever had. "No, not like before. Never like before." Lucas nodded, accepting this. "Okay. Can we go back to the cottage? I want to add today's shells to my collection." They walked back along the boardwalk, the evening cool and clear, the sound of waves a constant rhythm beneath the noise of the town. Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket, had been buzzing on and off all through dinner, but he ignored it. Not tonight. Tonight belonged to Lucas, and to the strange, unexpected hope that had walked into his life wearing linen pants and carrying the weight of a tech empire. Back at the cottage, Lucas arranged shells on his dresser, while Ethan finally reluctantly checked his messages. 23 new texts, 6 voicemails, 12 emails. Most were more of the same legal threats from Meridian's counsel, panicked messages from engineers, increasingly frantic communications from Vanessa that had shifted from angry to desperate. But one message stood out. From Vanessa herself, sent 20 minutes ago. "Ethan, we need to talk, not as COO to employee, person to person. I made mistakes. Please call me." Person to person. After 8 years of being treated as a function, as a problem solver, as something to be leveraged and discarded, now she wanted to talk person to person. Ethan stared at the message. He should delete it. He should block her number. He should let the lawyers handle whatever came next, and focus on the time he had left with Lucas. But something in him needed to hear what she had to say, needed to know if there was any acknowledgement, any recognition, any shred of understanding about what she'd actually done. He stepped outside onto the deck and called her back. She answered on the first ring. "Ethan, thank you for calling." Her voice was different. No edge, no authority. Just exhaustion that mirrored his own. "I'm listening." Vanessa was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again there was a brittleness to her tone he'd never heard before. "We're falling apart completely. Tom Patterson suspended his contract this morning. Jennifer Valdez is threatening to do the same. We failed an audit because nobody could find compliance documentation you apparently kept organized. The board called an emergency meeting and they're talking about my job." Ethan said nothing, letting the silence stretch. "The engineers, your team, they're not incompetent, Ethan. But they don't know how to function without you, and I'm realizing that's my fault as much as yours. Why are you telling me this? Because I need your help. We need your help. Come back. Name your price. I'll get you a director title, double your salary, whatever it takes. Just help us stabilize this before we lose everything." Ethan leaned against the deck railing, watching the ocean. The moon was nearly full, painting the water in silver light. "You fired me, Vanessa." "I know. I was angry. I made a bad decision in the moment, and I'm trying to fix it. By offering me more money. By acknowledging that we can't do this without you. Yes, you can. You just don't want to do the work it would take. You'd rather call me back, pay me enough that I'll swallow my pride and forget what happened, and go back to being the person who compensates for all the structural problems you don't want to address. That's not... It is, though. You're not calling because you've learned anything, or because you're going to change how the company operates. You're calling because things are breaking, and I'm the easiest fix. But I'm not a fix, Vanessa. I'm a person. And I have a son who deserves a father who's actually present. I spent 8 years giving you everything I had, and it was never going to be enough, because the system you built requires someone to sacrifice themselves to keep it running." Vanessa's voice hardened slightly. "So, you're just going to walk away? Let everyone who depends on those systems suffer because you're angry? I documented everything they need. If they're suffering, it's because the company created a culture where one person knowing everything was more convenient than distributing that knowledge. That's not on me." "Ethan, please. I need to go. My son is waiting." He ended the call before she could respond. His hands were shaking slightly. Adrenaline anger, something he didn't have a name for. He'd just turned down what was probably a significant amount of money. He'd said no to people who depended on systems he'd built. He'd chosen Lucas over everything that had defined his professional identity for 8 years, and it felt right. The phone buzzed almost immediately. Another message from Vanessa. "Think about what you're doing. You're burning bridges you might need." Ethan blocked her number. Then he blocked HR and legal, and every Meridian contact except the junior engineers, because they weren't the problem, and if they reached out with genuine technical questions, he might still help them. But he was done being the solution to someone else's structural dysfunction. Lucas appeared at the door. "Dad, everything okay?" "Yeah, buddy. Come here." Lucas joined him on the deck, and Ethan pulled his son against his side. They stood there watching moonlight on water, and Ethan felt the weight of the past 8 years starting to lift. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" "Yeah, Lucas, we're going to be better than okay." Day 8 began with unexpected violence. Not physical, the kind that comes from watching carefully constructed lies collapse under the weight of their own contradictions. Ethan woke to 17 new messages, all from numbers he didn't recognize. He ignored them and made pancakes with Lucas, determined to protect these last days from the chaos erupting in his absence. But after Lucas went to take a shower, Ethan made the mistake of checking email. The subject line from Tom Prescott was simple: FYI, audit results. The message body was devastating. Ethan wanted to share what we found when we ran comprehensive analysis of Meridian's support over the past 24 months. Attachment shows ticket resolution by engineer. Your name appears on 68% of all closed tickets. The remaining 32% are split among your entire team. More concerning, of that 32%, you were involved in guidance/escalation on 27%. So 95% of our support touched you directly. We paid premium rates for enterprise team support. What we got was one person working unsustainable hours while others collected paychecks. I've suspended our contract effective immediately. Jennifer Valdez ran similar numbers, 71% for her. She's already filed termination notice. Thought you should know the truth is getting documented. Let me know when you're ready to talk consulting. Tom. Ethan stared at the numbers. He'd known he was handling most of the work, but seeing it quantified was different. 68%, nearly 7 out of every 10 problems solved by his hands alone. His phone rang. Jennifer Valdez. Ethan, I'm calling with a proposal, and I want you to hear me out before you say no. I'm listening. Her voice carried both frustration and determination. We need to migrate off Meridian's platform, and we need it done right. 20 hours a week, fully remote, 8 weeks. You document their architecture as it relates to our implementation, train our team on the systems, and help us build a transition plan. $300 an hour. That's $48,000 for 2 months of part-time work. Ethan's brain stuttered over the number. $48,000 was almost his entire annual salary at Meridian. That's more than it's worth every penny, because the alternative is platform failure, data loss, and potential regulatory violations that would cost us millions. You built the systems we're using. You know where the problems are buried. More importantly, you know how to teach other people to maintain what you built. What's your answer? Ethan thought about Lucas, about rent due in 2 weeks, about health insurance and grocery bills, and the $11,000 in savings that was supposed to last 3 months. Very interested. Can we talk Monday? Monday works. And Ethan, what Meridian did to you, firing their best engineer for setting a boundary, that's exactly the kind of dysfunction we're trying to avoid. Thank you for being willing to help us do better. After she hung up, Ethan sat with the weight of it. $48,000 for work he could do from home during hours that fit around Lucas's school schedule. No nights, no weekends, no sacrificing his son's childhood on the altar of someone else's poor planning. The phone rang again. Unknown number. He answered warily. Mr. Carter, this is Rebecca Torres from TechWatch Daily. I know you're on vacation, so I'll be brief. I've been investigating Meridian Technologies' collapse, and multiple sources have pointed me to you. I'd like to speak on record about what you experienced there, not just for the story, but because I think there's a larger pattern of exploitation in this industry that needs exposure. Ethan walked out onto the deck, lowering his voice. What sources? Tom Prescott, Jennifer Valdez, and a junior engineer named Greg Chen, who forwarded me internal documentation showing workload distribution. 68% of tickets resolved by one person over 2 years. That's not poor planning, Mr. Carter. That's systematic exploitation disguised as operational necessity. Greg had leaked it. The kid had risked his job to tell the truth, and apparently decided that truth needed a wider audience. This is bigger than one company. This is about an industry-wide culture that burns out engineers and calls it dedication. Will you help me tell that story? Ethan could stay silent. Take the settlement when Meridian inevitably offered it. Move on quietly and let the whole ugly episode fade into employment history. Or he could speak up, risk industry backlash, but maybe prevent the next engineer from spending 8 years thinking sacrifice was the same as success. He thought about Lucas, about Sophia getting laid off for failures that weren't hers, about every developer grinding themselves to dust because they didn't know they were allowed to say no. Yes, I'll talk, but not until after I'm home with my son. This week is his. Understood. I'll call you Monday. And Mr. Carter, thank you. Stories like yours change industries. Day 9 started with something Ethan hadn't planned for a visitor. He was making coffee when the rental cottage doorbell rang. Lucas was still asleep. Ethan opened the door to find Vanessa Hale standing on his porch. She looked terrible. No makeup, hair pulled back, messily dark circles under eyes that seemed to have aged years in days. Not the polished COO who'd fired him 5 days ago. Something broken, barely holding itself together. Can we talk, please? Just 5 minutes. Ethan's first instinct was to close the door, but something in her expression, raw, desperate, made him hesitate. You have 3. She stayed on the doorstep. Ethan didn't invite her inside. The board accepted my resignation Friday. I'm done. But before I disappear, I needed to tell you in person that I was wrong. Silence stretched between them. I built Meridian's entire strategy around you. I told investors we had robust infrastructure capability. I told clients we had 24/7 expert support. But it was always just you, working nights, weekends, holidays, and I convinced myself that was acceptable because you never complained. I did complain. I asked for more staff, training budget, resources. You said no every time. Because it was cheaper to overwork one person than to build a real team. And you were so competent at it that I could ignore how unsustainable it was. Long silence. Ethan waited, refusing to make this easier. When you refused to come back, I panicked, because I knew if you were gone even for a week, everything would fall apart. And instead of admitting that was my failure, I punished you for exposing it. Why are you here, Vanessa? She pulled an envelope from her bag. Because you deserve to hear this from me, not from lawyers or news articles. Meridian is being sold. Acquisition closes in 2 weeks. Their gutting executive team laying off 60% of engineering, pivoting to managed services. Everything we built is being dismantled. She looked at him directly, and Ethan saw genuine pain there, not for him, but for her own failures finally catching up. And it's because I built it on exploitation instead of sustainability. You were the canary in the coal mine. When you left, it proved the air was toxic all along. She handed him the envelope. That's the settlement offer. Legal wanted non-disparagement language. I told them to remove it. You should be free to tell your story if you want. You've earned that right. She turned to leave, then paused. I hope Lucas is having a good vacation. He's lucky to have a father who chose him. She walked away before Ethan could respond. Lucas appeared behind him, watching through the screen door. Was that your old boss? Yeah. Did she come to say sorry? Yeah, she did. Are you going to forgive her? Ethan thought about that, about Jessica teaching him that forgiveness wasn't about absolving someone else, but about releasing your own anger, about the difference between understanding someone and excusing what they'd done. I don't know yet, but I understand her a little better now. The envelope contained exactly what Vanessa had promised. 6 months severance, $72,000. Health insurance through December. Neutral employment reference. And no non-disparagement clause, which meant he could speak freely about what had happened without legal consequences. Ethan signed it. Not because he forgave Meridian, but because protecting Lucas's future mattered more than holding on to anger. Within a week, the money hit his account. Combined with Jennifer's consulting offer, they were suddenly more financially stable than Ethan had been in years. Not rich, not secure long-term, but breathing room. Space to make choices instead of just reacting to crises. Lucas noticed immediately when Ethan checked their bank balance that evening. Are we rich now? Ethan laughed, pulled his son onto his lap. No, buddy. But we're stable, and that's better. Does that mean we can come back to Crescent Bay next year? Absolutely. Every year if you want. Lucas hugged him tight, and Ethan felt the last piece of fear dissolve. They were going to be okay. Better than okay. The final full day in Crescent Bay arrived with morning fog so thick the ocean disappeared into white void. Lucas stood on the deck, wrapped in a blanket, fascinated by the strangeness of being inside a cloud. By the time they finished breakfast, pancakes, their tradition now, the sun had burned through, promising one last perfect beach day. They were packing the beach bag when Ethan's phone rang. Rachel Ashford's name on the screen made his pulse quicken in a way he wasn't quite ready to examine. Rachel. Ethan, I hope I'm not interrupting your last day. Not at all. We're just heading to the beach. A pause, then. I know we talked about having a conversation when you're ready, but I'm actually at my house right now, and I was wondering if you and Lucas might want to stop by this afternoon. No pressure, no formal interview. I just thought it might be easier to talk in person, and frankly, I'd enjoy the company. Ethan covered the phone, looked at Lucas. Remember Rachel from dinner? She's invited us to her house this afternoon. You up for that, or would you rather have the afternoon to ourselves? Lucas considered this seriously. Does she have a cool house? I have no idea. Then let's go. Maybe it has a pool. Ethan uncovered the phone. We'd love to come by. What time works? How about 3? That gives you time for one last beach morning. I'll text you the address. Rachel's house turned out to be 15 minutes north, set on a bluff with sweeping coastline views. Natural wood and glass designed to blend into the landscape rather than dominate it. Beautiful but not ostentatious, the kind of place that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. Lucas's eyes went wide as they pulled up the driveway. Okay, this is definitely a cool house. Rachel met them at the door in jeans and a faded Stanford t-shirt, barefoot, and completely at ease in a way she hadn't been at the restaurant. Like she'd shed the corporate armor and remembered how to just be human. Welcome. Come on in. Fair warning, the architecture is better than the furniture. My ex-husband got most of the good stuff in the divorce. The interior was open and airy, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing ocean views that made the cottage they'd rented look like a closet. Lucas immediately spotted the deck and a telescope set up on a tripod. "Can I go look?" Rachel nodded. "Go ahead. The telescope's a bit finicky, but you can't break it." Lucas disappeared outside with the enthusiasm of a kid given permission to investigate something fascinating, and Rachel led Ethan to comfortable chairs on the deck. "He's a good kid. You've done well with him. He makes it easy most of the time." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Lucas peer through the telescope with scientific intensity. Rachel shifted forward, her expression becoming more focused. "So, I know we're supposed to wait until you're officially ready, but I wanted to give you more context about what I mentioned at dinner, if you're interested." "I'm interested." She smiled slightly. "Cascade has a problem. We've gotten very good at building resilient technical systems, but we're not as good at building resilient human systems. We have clients who've become dependent on specific engineers, teams that can't function when key people take vacation, and institutional knowledge that lives in people's heads instead of in documentation." "Sounds familiar." "It should. It's the same pattern you lived at Meridian, just on a larger scale. The difference is we recognize it as a problem and we want to fix it. That's why we created the Infrastructure Resilience Division 6 months ago." Lucas had found binoculars and was scanning the horizon for dolphins, completely absorbed. What would that look like in practice? Rachel leaned back, organizing her thoughts with visible care. "A few things. First, auditing existing client implementations to identify single points of failure, both technical and human. Second, working with their teams to document systems, distribute knowledge, build genuine redundancy. Third, helping leadership understand that sustainable excellence requires sustainable staffing and realistic expectations." She paused. "And fourth, occasionally telling people uncomfortable truths about how their culture is setting them up for failure." That last one sounds like a good way to lose clients. It is. But it's also the only way to actually solve the problem instead of just applying expensive bandages. We've learned that clients who actually want to fix their infrastructure issues appreciate honesty more than they appreciate being told everything's fine when it isn't. Ethan thought about the past 8 years. How many times had he wanted to tell Vanessa their staffing was inadequate, their expectations unrealistic, their culture unsustainable? How many times had he swallowed that truth because it was easier than the conflict? What would my role be specifically? Leading the technical architecture side of the division. You'd have a team of engineers and consultants who do the actual implementation work, but you'd be responsible for the methodology, the assessment frameworks, and the client relationships. It's part engineering, part teaching, part psychology. And it requires someone who's actually lived the problem, not just studied it academically, but felt what it's like to be the person holding everything together. What about hours travel I can't do, 60-hour weeks, or constant business trips? Rachel's expression was firm. Standard expectation is 40 hours. We track hours not to micromanage, but to identify when someone's consistently over and address the root cause. Travel happens, but it's planned in advance and limited to maybe 1 week per month at most. The whole point of the division is modeling sustainable practices, which means we can't burn out the people running it. What about emergencies? Define emergency. Client system is failing. They're losing money by the hour. Nobody can fix it but me. Rachel shook her head. That's not an emergency. That's a dependency we failed to address during the assessment phase. Real emergencies are rare and by definition unpredictable. Situations like you just described are the result of poor planning and insufficient knowledge transfer. If we find ourselves in that position, the answer isn't to sacrifice your weekend. It's to figure out why our process failed and fix it so it doesn't happen again. Ethan felt something in his chest loosen tension he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it was there. You actually mean that? I do. Rachel's voice carried weight. Look, I built Cascade by working insane hours for the first decade. I missed my daughter's childhood, destroyed my marriage. Ended up watching my father die at 64 from stress-induced cardiac issues because he couldn't slow down either. I learned the expensive way that heroic individual effort isn't a business strategy, it's a failure mode dressed up as dedication. She paused, watching Lucas through the telescope. The whole reason I'm still involved with the company is to make sure we don't build a culture that requires other people to make the same mistakes I did. Lucas came running over, breathless. There's a seal down there, like a real seal, just swimming around. Rachel smiled. There's a whole colony about half a mile south. If you look through the telescope, you can usually spot them on the rocks. Lucas disappeared again, and Rachel turned back to Ethan. I'll be honest with you, this job isn't easy. You'll be dealing with entrenched cultures, resistant leadership, and people who've built their identities around being indispensable. You'll have to tell clients things they don't want to hear, and sometimes they'll fire us rather than face uncomfortable truths about how they operate. It requires patience, emotional intelligence, and the confidence to stand firm when people push back. What's the compensation? Rachel named a base salary that was nearly double what Ethan had made at Meridian, plus equity, plus benefits, that included 4 weeks of vacation, full health coverage, and a professional development budget. The number made Ethan's head spin. That's market rate for the role and the expertise. We're not doing you a favor, Ethan. We're trying to hire someone who can build something important, and that's worth paying for properly. Ethan looked out at the ocean, at his son, peering through the telescope with focused intensity at the life they'd built together through sheer determination and love. Can I ask you something personal? Sure. Why did you share a table with us that night? You could have sat alone or asked for a different table. Rachel was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried unexpected vulnerability. Because you reminded me of someone I used to be. And because Lucas reminded me of the daughter I didn't spend enough time with when she was that age. I saw you two together, and I saw something I'd lost and couldn't get back, so I wanted to be around it for a little while, even if it wasn't mine. The honesty was almost painful in its simplicity. When would you need an answer? Take your time. Finish your vacation. Go home. Settle in. The position isn't going anywhere, and I'd rather you take 3 weeks to be sure than 3 days to be polite. If you decide it's not right, no hard feelings. And if you decide you want to explore it further, we'll set up proper interviews with the team, let you meet the people you'd be working with, make sure it's actually a good fit rather than just a good story. They talked for another hour about technical details, team structure, and the kinds of projects Ethan would be working on. Rachel answered every question with straightforward clarity, never overselling, never making promises she couldn't keep. By the time Lucas reluctantly pulled himself away from the telescope and they said their goodbyes, Ethan felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, hope grounded in reality rather than desperation. They drove back to the cottage in comfortable silence. Lucas fell asleep almost immediately after dinner, exhausted from sun and excitement. Ethan sat on the deck with his laptop and pulled up the settlement offer from Meridian. 6 months' salary, health insurance, neutral reference, in exchange for signing away his right to speak publicly about what had happened. He thought about Greg Chen, who'd risked his job to tell clients the truth, about Tom Patterson and Jennifer Valdez, who'd held Meridian accountable when they could have just quietly moved on, about Rachel Ashford, who'd built a company by learning from her mistakes instead of repeating them. Ethan opened a reply to Meridian's legal department and typed carefully, "I've reviewed the settlement offer. I'm willing to accept it with one modification, remove the non-disparagement clause. I have no interest in trash-talking Meridian publicly, but I'm also not going to sign away my right to speak honestly about my experience if asked directly. Everything else in the offer is acceptable. If you can agree to that change, I'll sign by Monday. If not, I'll decline the settlement and we can both move on without any further legal entanglement." He sent it before he could second-guess himself. The response came 30 minutes later. "Ethan, I'll take this to the board. Given the current situation, I believe they'll accept your terms. I'll have a revised agreement to you by tomorrow evening." Ethan closed the laptop and called Jennifer Valdez. She answered on the second ring. "Ethan, please tell me you're calling with good news. I'm accepting your consulting offer, 20 hours a week for 8 weeks, starting 2 weeks from Monday. That'll give me time to get settled back home and set up a proper workspace." Jennifer's relief was audible. "Thank you, seriously. You're saving us from a catastrophically expensive migration timeline." "I'm going to need the contract to specify that hours are flexible, work is fully remote, and that I have final say on the documentation structure. I'm not interested in being micromanaged or having someone second-guess the methodology." "Done. I'll have our legal team draw up the agreement and send it over. Anything else?" "Yeah. If this works out well and you hear about other companies in similar situations, I might be interested in taking on additional consulting clients down the line. No promises, but keep me in mind." "Absolutely. You know, Ethan, I've been in tech for 20 years and I've worked with a lot of talented people. But what you did at Meridian, holding together an entire platform essentially solo for 8 years while raising a kid alone, that's not just talent. That's a level of competence and dedication that's genuinely rare. Any company would be lucky to have you." After they hung up, Ethan sat with the quiet satisfaction of decisions made and paths chosen. He pulled up Rachel's email and sent a brief message. "Rachel, thank you for this afternoon. I'd like to move forward with the formal interview process for the infrastructure resilience position. I'll need a few weeks to tie up some consulting commitments, but I'm genuinely interested in exploring whether this could be the right fit for both of us. Ethan." The response came quickly. "Ethan, that's excellent news. Take whatever time you need. We'll be here when you're ready. Looking forward to working with you. Rachel." Something in the phrasing, "looking forward to working with you," made Ethan smile despite himself. There was warmth there beneath the professional language, interest that went beyond just hiring competence. He shut the laptop and went to check on Lucas one last time before bed. His son was sprawled across the bed in that completely unself-conscious way children sleep, sand dollar clutched in one hand, even in dreams. Ethan stood in the doorway watching the rise and fall of small breaths and felt the weight of the past 8 years finally begin to lift. They were going to be okay. Better than okay. For the first time since Jessica died, Ethan believed in futures again. 6 months later, Ethan sat in his home office, the second bedroom of their apartment that he'd converted into actual workspace instead of a corner of the kitchen table, and closed his laptop at exactly 5 o'clock. The screen went dark. The work was done. And unlike every other job he'd ever held, done actually meant done. No alerts would wake him at 3 a.m. No emergency calls would interrupt dinner. No weekend fires would consume the time he'd promised Lucas. His son appeared in the doorway, right on schedule, backpack slung over one shoulder, grass stains on his soccer uniform. "We won 4-2. I scored once." Ethan stood, pulled Lucas into a hug. "That's amazing. Tell me about it over dinner." They made tacos together, their new tradition replacing the hurried microwave meals of the Meridian years. Lucas narrated the entire game while grating cheese with the focused intensity he brought to everything, and Ethan listened like it was the most important debrief he'd ever received. Because it was. The consulting work for Jennifer had wrapped 3 weeks ago, right on schedule. 8 weeks, 20 hours per week, $48,000 that had stabilized their finances and proved something Ethan hadn't quite believed: his expertise had value beyond Meridian's exploitation of it. 2 other companies had reached out during that time offering similar contracts. Ethan had accepted one, declined the other. Selective now, protective of the boundaries he'd learned to enforce. And in 2 days, he would start at Cascade Dynamics, Director of Infrastructure Resilience. Real title, real salary, real opportunity to turn 8 years of pain into something that might prevent others from living the same pattern. His phone buzzed. Rachel's name on the screen still made his pulse quicken in ways he wasn't quite ready to examine too closely. "Rachel." "Hey. I know you don't start until Monday, but I wanted to give you a heads up. The team is excited to meet you. Sarah Kim especially. She's been asking when you're coming in every day for the past week." Ethan smiled. He'd met Sarah during the interview process, sharp, direct, the kind of engineer who saw through corporate nonsense and demanded substance. They'd connected immediately over shared war stories about documentation failures. I'm looking forward to it. Nervous, but looking forward to it. A pause on the other end, then Rachel's voice shifted less. CEO, more human. Ethan, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you doing anything Saturday? I know this is last minute, but there's a healthcare tech conference in San Diego. Tom Prescott asked me to speak on a panel about building sustainable engineering teams, and I was wondering if you and Lucas might want to come. Not for the conference necessarily, but San Diego's nice, and I thought maybe we could get dinner after. All of us. The invitation carried weight beyond its casual delivery. Rachel had kept things scrupulously professional since that afternoon at her house emails about onboarding logistics team introductions. Nothing personal. Nothing that crossed the line between future employer and potential something else. Until now. Lucas would love San Diego, and I'd like to see you speak. Yeah, relief evident in her voice. Okay, good. I'll send you the details. And Ethan, bring him. Lucas. I'd really like to see him again. After they hung up, Lucas appeared with a knowing grin that made him look far older than 10. Was that Rachel? How did you smile different when you talked to her, like happy nervous instead of just happy. Ethan felt his face heat. It's okay, Dad. I like her. She's cool, and she actually listens when I talk about stuff. The observation landed with unexpected force. Lucas had learned young which adults pretended to care and which ones actually did. That he'd placed Rachel in the second category meant more than any professional credential. She invited us to San Diego this weekend. There's a conference she's speaking at, and she thought we might have dinner after. What do you think? Lucas's face lit up. Can we go to the zoo? I've heard San Diego has the best zoo. We can definitely go to the zoo. Then yes, absolutely yes. Saturday arrived with California sunshine and Lucas's barely contained excitement. They drove down early, spent the morning at the San Diego Zoo, watching Lucas take approximately 300 photos of every animal, then headed to the convention center where the healthcare tech conference was being held. The panel was titled Building Resilient Tech Teams in Healthcare, and Rachel sat at the far end of a table with 3 other executives. She wore a charcoal suit that somehow managed to look both authoritative and approachable, her dark hair pulled back in a way that made her cheekbones sharp and striking. Ethan and Lucas sat in the back trying to be unobtrusive, but when Rachel took the stage and scanned the audience, her eyes found them immediately, and something in her expression softened. The moderator posed the opening question. How do you prevent burnout on engineering teams? The first 2 panelists gave corporate answers, wellness programs, flexible hours, mental health resources. Good answers, politically safe, ultimately meaningless because they treated symptoms instead of causes. Then the moderator turned to Rachel. She leaned forward slightly, and Ethan recognized the shift. This was Rachel dropping the CEO mask and speaking truth. You don't prevent burnout with perks. You prevent it by not building systems that require burnout to function. The room went quiet. If your company can't survive without someone working 60-hour weeks, you don't have a staffing problem. You have a culture problem. I spent the first decade of my career working unsustainable hours, telling myself it was what success required. All it did was cost me my marriage and my relationship with my daughter. Her voice steadied, found its core. Real resilience means anyone can take vacation and systems keep running. If that's not true, you're one resignation away from disaster. And to be clear, this isn't just about tech. This is about people. I've seen brilliant engineers nearly lose their children because they prioritized systems over family. I've watched companies fire their best talent for setting boundaries, then act shocked when everything collapses. She paused, and Ethan felt her looking directly at him across the room. The best thing that can happen to a broken system is for someone brave enough to stop holding it together. Because only then does the dysfunction become visible enough to fix. Applause started slowly, then built. People were standing. Lucas was clapping so hard his hands had to hurt, grinning up at Ethan with pure pride. After the panel, a line formed, executives wanting Rachel's card engineers, sharing their own stories of exploitation disguised as dedication. Ethan and Lucas waited off to the side, and when Rachel finally extracted herself, she looked exhausted but alive in a way that suggested the talk had cost her something and given her something in equal measure. That was incredible. Ethan meant it completely. I might have been a little too honest. Rachel smiled, but uncertainty flickered beneath it. My PR team is probably having heart attacks. You told the truth. People needed to hear it. Lucas tugged on Rachel's sleeve. You were really brave up there. Like superhero brave. Rachel crouched down to Lucas's level, and Ethan watched her whole demeanor shift, the CEO dissolving into someone softer, more vulnerable. Thank you, Lucas. That means a lot to me. They had dinner at a small Italian place in the gas lamp quarter, checkered tablecloths, warm lighting, the kind of unpretentious spot that felt miles away from corporate San Diego. Lucas dominated the conversation with facts about the animals they'd seen, and Rachel listened with genuine interest, asking questions that proved she was actually retaining information about habitat preservation and endangered species programs. After Lucas excused himself to the bathroom, Rachel's expression turned serious. I need to tell you something, and it might make things complicated, but I've learned that honesty is better than assumptions. Ethan's pulse kicked up. Okay. When I met you and Lucas that night at the restaurant, I didn't sit with you just because the hostess asked. She did ask, and I was going to say no. Then I saw you two, the way you looked at him, the way he trusted you, and I felt this pull, this longing for something I'd convinced myself I didn't deserve. She paused, choosing words carefully. I've been alone for a long time. I built Cascade, made more money than I know what to do with, achieved everything I thought I wanted. But my father died 3 years ago from a stress-induced heart attack because he never learned to slow down. And before he died, he told me that all his success, the company, the money, everything didn't mean anything because he'd spent it alone. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I'm terrified I'm on the same path. Then I met you, and I saw someone who'd chosen differently, who'd picked his son over his career when it mattered. And I started wondering if maybe it wasn't too late for me to learn that. Ethan's throat felt tight. Rachel, I'm not a hero. I spent 8 years choosing wrong. That one choice on the beach that wasn't wisdom. That was desperation. But you learned. That's the point. My father never did. Lucas was coming back from the bathroom. Rachel straightened, composing herself with visible effort. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know why I offered you the job. Yes, you're qualified, incredibly qualified. But also, I wanted you in my life. And I'm hoping when you're ready, when it feels right, that maybe we could explore what that might look like. Lucas slid back into his seat, oblivious to the weight that had just settled over the table. Can we get dessert? I saw they have tiramisu. Rachel smiled, and Ethan saw her deliberately lighten shift back into the easy warmth she showed Lucas. Absolutely. Tiramisu sounds perfect. Later, after they'd dropped Rachel at her hotel and were driving back to their own, Lucas spoke into the comfortable darkness. You like her, don't you? Like really like her. No point in lying to a kid who'd already proven he saw more than adults gave him credit for. Yeah, I do. Do you think Mom would be okay with that? The question hit Ethan in the center of his chest. He pulled over into a parking lot, turned to face his son. I think your mom would want me to be happy, and she'd want you to have people in your life who love you. Rachel's not trying to replace her, nobody could, but there's room in our lives for new people, for new kinds of love. Lucas nodded, processing with that serious expression he got when working through complex emotions. I miss Mom. Like I don't remember her much, but I miss the idea of having her, I know exactly what you mean. But I also think it'd be nice to have someone else who cares about us, someone who makes you smile the way Rachel does. Ethan pulled Lucas into a hug, feeling his son's small body against his chest, breathing in the scent of hotel shampoo and childhood. When did you get so wise? Good genes. Lucas's voice was muffled against Ethan's shoulder. Mom's brain's your heart, my natural charm. Ethan laughed, and it felt like permission from Lucas, from Jessica's memory, from himself, to want something beyond just survival. Monday morning arrived with the particular anxiety of first days. Ethan woke at 6, made coffee, checked his reflection in the mirror like he was heading to a job interview instead of a position he'd already been hired for. Lucas appeared in the doorway, still in pajamas. "You're going to be great, Dad. They're lucky to have you." The vote of confidence from a 10-year-old steadied something in Ethan's chest. He logged into Cascade Systems at 8:30 from his home office, the remote-first policy, meaning he didn't have to commute to San Francisco unless he chose to. An email from Sarah Kim was already waiting. "Morning welcome officially to the chaos. No meetings today, just getting you oriented. I'll ping you on Slack around 10 for a quick sync. Take your time settling in. We're excited to have you. Sarah." At 10, the Slack call connected, and Sarah's face appeared on screen, sharp features, warm smile, the kind of directness that reminded Ethan why they'd connected during interviews. "How's your first morning?" "Quiet. I keep waiting for something to break." Sarah laughed. "That's the meridian trauma. It'll fade. Here's how we work. Core hours are 9 to 3. Be available for meetings. The rest of your 40 hours you choose. No weekend work unless you decide you want to. No responses expected after 5. Vacation is mandatory. We actually track who's not using theirs and have conversations about it. What if there's an emergency? We have on-call rotation. 1 week every 8 weeks. You're not in it for the first 3 months while you onboard. And emergencies are rare because we've designed our systems and our client engagements to make them rare." It sounded almost too good to be true. Ethan had spent so long in dysfunction that health looked suspicious. The first 2 weeks passed in a blur of onboarding client reviews and slowly learning to trust that 5 o'clock actually meant stopping. Lucas noticed the change immediately: homework help without Dad checking his phone, actual conversations over dinner weekends that didn't disappear into laptop work. "You're different now," Lucas observed one evening while they were cooking together. "Like lighter, less worried all the time. I'm working on it. It's good. I like this version better." Week 3 brought Ethan's first real project. A healthcare software company called MedTech Solutions had lost their lead architect to burnout, and their systems were barely limping along. The CEO wanted Cascade to help them recover. Ethan recognized the pattern immediately during the initial assessment call. One person had held everything together. Documentation was sparse. The team was terrified and dependent. Management wanted a quick replacement hire instead of addressing the structural rot. "You can't replace him." Ethan kept his voice even. "That's not the problem." The CEO, a woman named Patricia Chen, bristled visibly on the video call. "Then what is—" "You built a system that required him to burn out to function. If you hire another person and put them in the same situation, they'll burn out too. We need to rebuild your culture, not just your tech." Patricia's expression was skeptical, but something in it suggested she was listening. "I lived this. I was that person for 8 years. I know exactly how it ends. Let me show you a better way." Over the next 6 weeks, Ethan worked with MedTech's team to systematically distribute knowledge, build redundancy, and set boundaries that actually meant something. It wasn't easy. Entrenched habits died hard, and several team members initially resisted taking on responsibilities they'd been able to offload for years. But slowly things shifted. Documentation improved. Junior engineers started solving problems independently. The on-call rotation became actual rotation instead of one person's permanent state. And in week 8, Patricia called Ethan directly. "I just realized something. For the first time in 3 years, I'm not worried about what happens if someone gets sick or takes vacation. The system actually works now. You didn't just fix our tech, you fixed our company." After the call, Ethan sat staring at his screen, feeling something warm spread through his chest. His pain at Meridian hadn't been wasted. It was becoming the foundation for helping others avoid the same trap. An email from Rachel appeared. "Heard about the MedTech success from Patricia. She's referring 2 other companies. Well done. You're doing exactly what I'd hoped. R." The formality of the email couldn't hide the warmth underneath. They'd kept things professional since San Diego emails about projects, occasional Slack messages about technical details. But there was an awareness now, a current running beneath every interaction. Ethan hit reply. "Thanks. Feels good to turn that experience into something useful. E. Her response came immediately. Dinner this weekend. My treat. I'd like to hear about the project, and I'd like to see Lucas. R. Ethan's pulse quickened. He showed Lucas the email. Can I wear my shark shirt? You can wear whatever you want. Saturday evening found them at a quiet seafood place on the Embarcadero Lucas between Ethan and Rachel in the booth. The conversation flowed easily. Lucas talking about his science fair project on renewable energy, Rachel sharing stories about Cascade's early days with the self-deprecating humor of someone who'd learned to laugh at her own mistakes. After Lucas excused himself to the bathroom, Rachel's expression grew serious. I've been thinking about what I said in San Diego, about wanting you in my life. I need you to know I'm not trying to rush anything or make you uncomfortable. You work for me, and that complicates things, but I also can't pretend I don't feel what I feel. Ethan reached across the table, covered her hand with his. The touch was electric, grounding, terrifying in its rightness. I'm falling in love with you. I have been since that first dinner when you listened like no one ever has. When you saw me not as an engineer or an asset, but as a person. Lucas loves you, I love you, and if you're willing, I want to see where this goes. Rachel's eyes filled. I've never built anything real outside work. I don't know if I'll be good at. You've been doing it for months. Dinners with Lucas, asking about his science project, showing up. That's building real. She leaned across the table and kissed him soft, tentative, full of promise and fear and hope tangled together. Lucas's voice came from behind them, amused. I knew it. They broke apart, both laughing. Lucas slid back into the booth with a grin. So are you guys like dating now? Rachel looked at Ethan, question in her eyes. He nodded. Yeah, I think we are. Cool. Can I still call you Rachel, or is there something else I should call you? Rachel's expression went soft in a way Ethan had never seen. Rachel is perfect. The weeks folded into months. Rachel integrated into their lives with the careful deliberation of someone who knew what she was risking and chose to risk it anyway. She came to Lucas's soccer games, helped with homework, showed up for dinner 3 or 4 times a week. And slowly, carefully, she and Ethan built something neither of them had thought they deserved, a relationship grounded in honesty, boundaries, and the shared recognition that work served life, not the other way around. 1 year and 2 months after that phone call on a beach house deck, Ethan and Lucas returned to Crescent Bay. Same cottage, same ocean, everything different. Lucas was taller now, more confident, laughed easier. Ethan was healthier, present, genuinely happy in ways he'd forgotten were possible. And Rachel was with them, her first vacation in 5 years, deliberately planned, carefully protected from the pull of CEO responsibilities. On their last morning, they walked the beach together at sunrise. Lucas ran ahead, searching for sand dollars to add to his collection. Rachel's hand fit perfectly in Ethan's. So, her voice carried something vulnerable. I've been thinking. Dangerous. She elbowed him gently. Lucas asked me something last week. He wanted to know if I was going to be around for a long time or if this was temporary, and I realized I didn't have an answer because I've never asked you what you want this to be. Ethan stopped walking, turned to face her. The ocean spread endless behind them, morning light painting everything gold. I want you in our lives. Permanently. I want Sunday mornings and family dinners and someone to share the weight with. I want Lucas to have someone else who loves him the way you already do. I want to build a life that's about more than just surviving. Rachel's hands shook as she reached into her pocket, pulled out a small box. I was going to wait, do this more romantically, but I'm terrible at patience and Lucas already told me I should just ask. She opened the box. A simple band, perfect in its understatement. Ethan Carter, will you marry me? Will you let me be part of this family you've built? Will you teach me how to put people before systems and love before work and life before everything else? Ethan's vision blurred. Yes, absolutely yes. Lucas's voice carried from down the beach. Finally, I told her you'd say yes. They laughed through tears and Ethan pulled Rachel close, feeling her solid and real against him. This woman who'd seen him at his lowest and believed in his highest, who'd offered him not just a job but a future. Lucas ran up, grinning. "Does this mean Rachel's going to be my stepmom?" Rachel knelt down eye level with him. "If that's okay with you, I'm not trying to replace your mom, but I'd really like to be family." Lucas threw his arms around her neck. "I'd like that too." The three of them stood there on the beach, wrapped together, and Ethan felt every broken piece of the past 8 years finally settle into something whole. One phone call had destroyed the life he'd built, and in its destruction it had given him room to build something better, not perfect, never perfect, but sustainable in all the ways that mattered. Work that respected him, a son who had a present father, and a woman who taught him that success wasn't measured in hours worked or crises solved, but in moments like this sunrise family love that chose to show up. The ocean kept its rhythm patient and eternal. And Ethan Cole, for the first time since Jessica died, believed that the future held more than just survival. It held joy.